So I'd like to introduce everyone to the first talk in the speaker series for the philosophy department for fall 2007. Today we have Michael Zimmerman with us. Michael is the director of the Center for Humanities and the Arts up at CU Boulder. And Michael has listed his areas of interest: environmental philosophy, Nietzsche, Buddhism, Heidegger, philosophy and gender, and contemporary continental philosophy. And if I've left something...
well, I used to list philosophy of technology, so I guess I should add that now since I'm in the business.
And he used to list philosophy of technology. Michael has several books to his credit: Eclipse of the Self, The Development of Heidegger's Concept of Authenticity, Heidegger's Confrontation with Modernity, Technology, Politics, and Art, and Contesting Earth's Future, Radical Ecology, and Postmodernity. His CV is actually, it would take an hour to read to you, but he's quite accomplished, and we're very grateful that he came down to speak to us today with the title, Will Technological Advances Lead to a Transhuman Era?
Error?
That's E-R-A. Well, we can play with ambiguity, right? So thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. Okay. It's nice to have another branch of CU here, but we don't exploit it very much. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to meet some of you all. I think I'm about to think about it. Are we clean? Well, sure, maybe just a minute. So today I'm going to be, does anyone else need a handout?
That's where I'm sitting. Sure.
Today's talk is going to be about the definition and possibility, implications, and historical philosophical context for this push behind what is now being called singularity. That is, the unimaginable consequences of the rise of robots by the middle of this century that will have billions of times the intelligence of contemporary humans. That's not millions. Of course, when you get into millions, there's an extra zero too. So how did I arrive at this topic? Well, last Christmas vacation, I was getting together with some family members in Florida and went by this bookstore. I was on vacation in Florida. Just happened to have a bookstore. And this book was on the shelf, The Singularity is Near, by Ray Kurzweil. Now, Ray Kurzweil is a very famous inventor and futurist and technologist. He was a guy who worked with Stevie Wonder to create the computer reader, so you could put a text in the computer, scan it, and it'll talk the text to you. All right, so that's the guy. And he's been in the forefront of this whole issue. And he wrote a number of years earlier a book called The Age of Spiritual Machines, and this is the sequel to it. And this just came out last fall, and has provoked a lot of discussion and controversy, as you can imagine. Now, when you hear the title of Singularity is Near, what presumably he's trying to evoke is the slogan, the end is near. You get the connection? Well, but the term end, in this case, would have two different meanings. One would be the end of humanity as it has existed up to this point. And the other meaning of end would be, is this post-human the goal of humanity? In other words, are we kind of in a relay race, and are we passing the baton on to the next jump, evolutionary jump that the leaves behind? And so are we going to see this happen this century? So that's what this talks about. Now, I'm writing a big paper about this, but I'm not going to read to you. I just have some notes. Then I'm going to just go down through this list of questions. What is a singularity? Will it happen? Are we already transhuman, cyborgs? Who's pushing this agenda? What are some of the ethical, political implications? And I'll spend most of the time on historical philosophical context, and that's what this sheet is. Has some quotations from theology, history of philosophy, theology and philosophy in the West, and you'll see that the singularity is the latest expression of a drive impulse, imaginative reach that's been with us for a long time. So what is a singularity? Well, in astrophysics, the term is used to refer to events such as black holes. And a black hole is a star which is collapsed in on itself, creating a gravitational field so powerful that nothing, not even light, can escape from it. So that's why it's called a black hole. And supposedly no information can come out of the black hole, although now there's some doubt about that, right? Maybe a little bit out. But anyway, the point is that when Werner Vinge invented this term or used it in this new way in 1993, he's a mathematician at San Diego and a science fiction writer. He used it to refer to this. What would happen if super intelligent robots showed up who eclipsed our intelligence by millions of times? Then we would have no grasp of what they were even doing. And that what they were up to would be like a black hole. Nothing could come back from them to us that would make any sense. It would be sort of like, a caterpillar crawling across your foot while you're reading a book about Kant's critique or something. The caterpillar is not in touch with what's going on with you. So supposedly there would be a gap, at least that magnitude between what's coming and us as there is between us and the caterpillar. Now, why is this supposedly happening? Well, according to Ray Kurzweil and these other people involved in this, there's occurring a tremendous confluence of technical scientific capacities drawing from 4 different fields. There's genetic engineering, robotics, informatics, which is the whole digital computing world, and nanotechnology, Green and Barrett, as I like to say. That's the acronym for it. And that developments in each of these fields are reaching almost vertical tracks in terms of progress in their fields. And the people in these fields are starting to work together in ways that are going to produce and are producing astonishing developments. Now, according to Kurzweil, he's the guy, by the way, who predicted the year that Big Blue,
Deep Blue,
would beat the reigning world chess champion. He predicted it. Now, what he's predicting now is that by the year 2020, we'll be able to buy desktop computers for about $1,000 that will have computing capacity of the human brain. So we're talking about 13 years. Okay. Now, this depends upon the continuity of Moore's law, according to which computing capacity doubles every 18 months. And then the question is, well, can we keep this up? And he says once you get computers of that capacity, now remember, at the same time, all these other fields will also have been developing in these amazing ways. You're going to get robots, you see, who are going to be able to program themselves without all the problems that human programmers have, and they'll be able to develop computer programs that will be far in advance of anything we, as humans, in our embodied state, can even imagine. And then they will figure out, these robots will figure out how to reproduce themselves and basically take over. And so all these dystopian science fiction films and novels like The Terminator and all stuff, these are the attempts by contemporary artists to envision the dark side of this possibility. Now, Werner Vinge and Ray Kurzweil and many of these other people involved with this try to keep their eyes on the positive prize, the more utopian, and say there are dangers, but they don't see this type of super dark side as the ultimate consequence, although, of course, not anyone else. So that's what he meant by the singularity. And by the way, there's a gigantic literature out there about this. I mean, you would not believe the number of websites and research programs and books. I mean, it's like, I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. I was finding. So how likely is this to happen? Well, really, it all depends on a lot of factors. Because, this is an incredible book, by the way. The last couple hundred pages are his dense footnotes. But he spends much of the first part of the book with these graphs where he's showing the pace of development going into these nearly vertical lines. Now, here's the thing. If you have, let's say, certain technology starting to go up into one of these exponential curves, these cannot go on forever. What happens is they eventually turn into S-curves like this. All right. And so the question is, they call this part of the curve the knee. Okay, that's where the bend starts. And where this starts really is going to tell you where the S is going to happen. I mean, where the so the question is, where are we here? You see, how far are we going to? Is Moore's law of computing going to be able to sustain itself? This doubling in computing capacity every 18 months in terms of the actual, the processing capacity of a computer. Well, no one knows, but no one knows about any of these other trends. How far we'll be able to go with nanotechnology and genetic engineering. Now, Kurzweil gives an example in the book about the Human Genome Project. Now, everyone here is old enough to have actually lived through the Human Genome Project. When it was started, when was it, in the 80s, the late 80s or whatever it was, the prediction was it would take at least a century to map the human genome, but they did it in 13 years. And the reason was, according to Kurzweil and other students do this, is because developments in supporting fields, including computing and all these other areas, were in this upward drive and made possible breakthroughs in terms of the technical capacities that no one had anticipated. So they did it in 13 years. So what looks like to us long-term change in development, he says, as a number of futurists do, is going to be compressed into a much shorter time. So it is possible, these people argue that you are going to, I'll still be alive for this, possibly 20 years. We're all going to live through, these people say, an astounding revolution in the next 20 years, which we can't yet really imagine, because we don't have the historical, philosophical, theological, whatever premises or background to hold this conceptually, to hold what's coming, the transformation of humanity. Now, I've had some other things to say about this one. Will it happen? Who knows? Are we already transhuman? Now, here's some terminology you might want to become familiar with. If you punch in transhuman and or post-human into Google or whatever, you'll find a gazillion websites about all this. When Donna Haraway wrote her essay on, what's it called? The cyborg essay? What was the title of it? Forget. It's about 20 years ago. She published this famous essay on, the concluding sentence in which I'd rather be a cyborg than a goddess. Okay? Which is an outrageous thing to say in the mid-'80s with all this eco-feminism and all this kind of stuff. But she and Donna Haraway and subsequently N. Catherine Hales, professor of communication at UCLA, have helped to generate a gigantic academic literature on the implications of human implanting of technical devices and the acquisition of technical devices which increase our capacities in various ways. And so a cyborg is, as you know, a human being who's largely a technological invention, like the $6 Million Man or RoboCop and all these other, and the Terminator, etc. And are we heading in this direction? Are such science fiction capacities possible? Well, let me give you an example of this. You know about the cochlear implant debate? They have found, a lot of deafness stems from a failure of the cochlea in the ear to transmit auditory signals through up the nerve path to the auditory portion of the brain. Well, they've now figured out how to make an artificial cochlea, and they can implant it into that part of the ear structure, and then it makes possible the uptaking of auditory signals to the brain, and then deaf people can hear. Now, on the one hand, you say, wow, this is a fantastic development, but within the deaf community, it's a big source of controversy, because then these people will leave the deaf community. See, so the children will then be hearing children and no longer deaf children, and so there's a big controversy. Now, what looks at first glance like a gift is not so self-evident. Well, maybe in a generation it won't be such an issue as more and more deaf people are unable to hear. Presumably the same thing is going to be happening with people who are currently blind. They're already developing incredible breakthroughs in terms of generating a visual experience on the part of people who are functionally blind. And presumably, well, who knows what's going to happen. but it's important to get that the major shift that has taken place here, and this is not just Kurzweil, but many people point this out. 20th century science, up to the late part of the 20th century, was operating at what's called the molar level, the level of organs, individual organisms, organs, and cells. Okay, but with the breakthroughs that were made possible in the last 30 years, technologically and scientifically, we're now operating at the molecular level, and this changes the entire game because now you can re-molecularize phenomena that you cannot. You can work at the level you can't see to re-engineer entire species, right down to the atomic level. Apparently Richard Feynman, the great Caltech physicist, wrote a paper in the 50s, which I'd like to find, which he says is entitled "Plenty of Room at the Bottom." And he said there's nothing in our way of manipulating atoms. And that's where they're headed. That's what nanotechnology is premised on, the ability to create incredibly tiny machines that are able to function as tiny mechanical things, and that the possibility is we'll introduce billions and trillions of these right into your bloodstream, and they will go after tumors, or they will fix genetic malfunctions, etc. This is all Nobel Prize stuff, and people are going to be trying this. There's just no question about it. So to some extent, I think Haraway and Catherine Hales and others who write in this vein are right. We're already kind of cyborgs. We're incredibly dependent on the electronic grid, the digital grid. We have glasses, we have implants, people have artificial hearts. I mean, you name it, and just as more and more of this stuff coming. So we're already well on our way. Now, one of the things I came across when I was researching this was the whole world of what they call highly complex, multiple player digital worlds. You know what I'm talking about? Programs like Second Life. Now you're with me, right? Now, I had heard of the Second Life stuff, but you know, for those troglodyte types like me and others who are techno peasants, there are games like Second Life, which are highly complex. You pay money to become a member, and you invent an avatar. This is the terminology. An avatar is your second self, and this can be anything you want. You can, if you're a woman, you become a man, or vice versa, and you can make yourself blonde or whatever you want to be. And you then enter the game with these characteristics in biography. You can totally reinvent yourself. And you can you're assigned your own apartment, which they can decorate however you wish, and make really super cool with hot links in it, etc. And then you can invite people over, and they will show up as their avatars in your space. Now you can do all kind of things with these people, including have sex with them. They're big sex sites. I mean, in fact, I don't know what even to make of this, all right? But it's almost as if we're preparing, you see, we're preparing ourselves to get digital, because there are millions of people into this. Think of all these, for example, these sporting games, you know, when you have the, what do they call these teams? You can build the
Fantasy baseball.
Fantasy baseball and football, you have your own draft. And I mean, and in these virtual sites, people pay actual money to acquire property inside these sites. I mean, it's a whole second level of reality we've invented. So here's another instance, it seems to me, where we're moving into exploring a dimension of the digital reality where people feel more and more comfortable and are able to reinvent themselves and actually carry on a life there, which they can't do in their ordinary life. Now, I think it was Descartes who said one sign of the fact that we're not God is how we show up as embodied. Now, you know, if I were God, I would not look like this. You know, I would not have shown up with this avatar. It would have been a lot better, okay? Now, what's coming, according to not only participants in these virtual reality worlds, but also in terms of our capacity for intervention, is the ability of people to completely reinvent themselves, at least to a certain extent, and dramatically to change their children. So this gives rise to, I think, this other question for who's pushing this agenda. Well, if you visit the major websites, the trans and post-human website, you'll see that the guiding ideology tends to be somewhat libertarian. And their point is this: look, we aren't asking anyone to do this. That is to say, to re-engineer themselves, to acquire through various kinds of implantations and genetic engineering, etc., new powers, capacities, and so on for ourselves and our children. We are not expecting anybody to do it, we're not asking anybody to do it, but just don't tell us we can't do it. We have the right to do this. Now, so this is a very interesting issue, which is, we'll come up to the ethical political implications about this in a minute, but it's a very interesting moment, because part of the question that comes up is who will be able to afford this, et cetera, et cetera. We have a whole new class structure based on this. But a lot of the contemporary bioethics discourse is focusing on issues such as stem cell research, and can we get the stem cells from aborted embryos, blah, 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 or certain other major issues that everyone's familiar with. But according to what I've been able to understand, there's a vast amount of research going on that's flying under the radar of all this. That's that is going to be hugely profitable, it's privately funded, and it's not subject to any scrutiny. And suddenly it's going to be go on the market. And if it can't be licensed here, it'll be licensed in Samoa, or wherever it takes for people to go to achieve what they want to achieve. And those who are able to afford it will be able to get on the bandwagon, and with attendant risks. But this is happening. I mean, there's stuff going on that we don't know about. Now, one of the domains where it's going on publicly has to do with healing, because the promise is with these various types of technological scientific innovations, we're able to go into an organism and fix some genetic malady, or at the embryo stage, we'll be able to go in and insert certain genes and remove others and to fix any anticipated problems. You can cure all kind of stuff. So, according to the critics, this is the Trojan horse, you see, which is welcomed by everyone, because look at the promise of this. This is people healing and improving situations and so on. But all the technology that's being developed will then be directly applicable to the next step, which is the transhuman re-engineering of people with the goal of dramatic enhancements in muscularity, and good looks, and intelligence, aesthetic capacity, you name it. All these domains, which used to be a function of fate or God's decision, or whatever however we try to make sense out of the roll of the dice that ended up with me or with you, that's going to go by the boards. So they say. Now, the National Science Foundation, a few years ago, I wanted to look up the reference for this. I printed it out, published a 150-page document, which is a result of a number of years of study about all this, and was very much on board about that we're going to create this fantastic new set of possibilities for us. So the government is aware that this is going on. But you'll notice that all the debate is going on about stem cells, or all these other things are kind of not where they probably ought to be. So what are the ethical political implications? Well, these issues have been really high on the agenda in Europe since the late 90s. Jürgen Habermas even published a book about it, as have a number of other people in Europe. And there are some people in this country as well who are concerned about it. A major concern is the institution of a new class structure based upon how much you've been enhanced. How much can you afford, and how much, what did your parents decide to do with you in vitro? Well, I'm a natural, whereas my buddy here, they did X to him, and he didn't even have to go to college. See, college is way beyond college, right? So, have anyone seen the film Gattaca? Okay, now that's an excellent film that represents 50 years or so in the future. Here's a natural kid who's trying to be an astronaut, but the astronauts are all enhanced, and he's figured out the system to kind of, and he does launch, but it's a fascinating study of the whole issue of the enhanced versus the non-enhanced. So we may end up with a multi-tiered society with the naturals, somewhat enhanced, really enhanced, and the post-human. I don't know, and this could happen pretty soon, I think. Assuming all these S curves, S curves happen later than sooner, then a lot of stuff will be possible. Okay, so now I'm going to go spend the remaining time I have with this sheet of quotations, because this is does everyone have one of these handouts? Do you need one? Could you pass one back? Thank you. Now, in my own research, for many years, was very interested for many years in the philosophy of technology and so on. In the second book on Heidegger, it's called Heidegger's Confrontation with Modernity, Technology, Politics, and Art. And it was involved with a lot about the history behind and the impulse behind modern technology. But with the end of the Cold War, and with the end of the worst possibility of modern technology, which is thermonuclear war, I really kind of turned away and got really involved much more in environmental philosophy and so on. And I kind of suspended my research in this area. Now I'm back because I just can't believe what's happening. So this is a quote from Ray Kurzweil in The Singularity. Now look, this guy's brave and bold. I mean, listen to this assertion. This is the ultimate destiny of the singularity and of the universe. What is the ultimate destiny? Our civilization will expand outward, turning all the dumb matter and energy we encounter into sublimely intelligent, transcendent matter and energy. So in a sense, we can say that the singularity will ultimately infuse the universe with spirit. And he says this is as close to God as he can get. This is what the only thing you can imagine God meaning would be the total transformation of the universe, which started out as this completely unconscious, Big Bang moment, then becomes completely saturated with self-consciousness. Now that's Hegel, but it's a little more developed than Hegel was because of the technology. So now I'm going to read you some other quotes from the history of philosophy and some related areas to just get you a sense of how this has been anticipated, but people didn't have the technological capacity to realize it. So hitherto, much of the emphasis was on personal transformation, meditation, fasting, study, the various kinds of spiritual, intellectual disciplines designed to transform human beings from the kind of greedy, grasping, violent animals that we tend to be into something sublimely conscious and aware, an Overman, a Buddha, and so on, a Christ or Krishna. So that the tradition has focused more on that. Now, the promise is that in this century, you can say goodbye to all that. You don't need to. No pain, no gain problem is going to go away. So here's the St. Paul's letter to the Romans. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility. The whole of creation, not just humans, okay? Not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will also be set free from its slavery to corruption, into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know now, listen to this, we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. All right, now, this is Kurzweil 2,000 years ago. Okay? That the entire creation is yearning to escape from ignorance, violence, general inability to manifest its glory, but this is going to be possible. Now, during the Middle Ages, up until around 11 or 1200, this vision of perfection was restricted to the practices I mentioned, prayer and fasting and the usual activities designed to allow grace to infuse one with a transformed spirit, etc. But beginning in the early part of the second millennium, you had a technological, kind of scientific dynamism come up, with the promise being that with the acquisition of increasing knowledge, human beings could actually create for themselves a new Eden on earth and heal one aspect of the fall. We still had to rely on God for certain other things, but there's a lot we can do on our own. So this is a big part of it. Now, David Noble recently published his book, The Religion of Technology. I highly recommend it. It gives a history of all this. And here's what he says. In early modern times, an unprecedented millenarian milieu decisively and indelibly shaped the dynamic Western conception of technology. It encouraged a new lordly attitude toward nature, reflecting the anticipated restoration of Edenic dominion over creation. As Milton insisted, in the course of millennial advance, nature would not merely become known to man, but, quote, would surrender to man as its appointed governor, and his rule would extend from command of earth and seas to dominion over the stars, unquote. Well, again, this is Kurzweil. Now, Kurzweil says if we can only overcome the problem of the limitation of light speed. We can achieve superluminary speed. Then within a few centuries after this liftoff, we could take over the entire universe. Not just the Milky Way galaxy, let alone our own pathetic little solar system. This is
I think
just
he has his
a
own
single
Darth
step.
Vader helmet.
Now, the next quote I want to read is from Hegel. Now, Hegel and Marx
That's a lot of
were
fun.
tremendously important in proposing a certain type of developmental model for Western history, drawing on Aristotle. Now, it's hard to overemphasize this, and one of the things that Donna Haraway has always been contesting is this model, that there's an alpha and omega, that there's a beginning point, which would be the seed, and an ending point, which would be the maturation of the seed in all its perfection. She has always been really worried about this because she says this drives a lot of the craziness of Western civilization. But all this comes out of a certain interpretation of Aristotle. You know, for Aristotle, the fertilized egg or seed contains within itself all the subsequent stages of the development of the phenomenon, a living being. For example, the oak tree is contained in the acorn, and we're contained in the zygote, although they didn't have that concept back then. And so that we unfold in stages. Well, for Hegel and Marx, the whole of Western history world history contains the same process. There's an initial point in human history, whether it's Adam and Eve or wherever you want to start, and then subsequent developments involve the maturation of humanity, especially in terms of consciousness, but also in terms of the institutions necessary to support such consciousness and to extend it. And so Hegel says in his philosophy of nature, nature is mind estranged from itself. Estranged from the idea, nature is only the corpse of the understanding. Nature is the idea, but only implicitly. This is why Schelling called it petrified intelligence. Others even a frozen intelligence. Yet God does not remain petrified and dead. The stones cry out and raise themselves to spirit. What a saying, right? Well, what are they saying about us? And what is the history of the universe? You know, first you have a whole first generation stars. They go supernova. They spew out these heavy elements which they created. These help form not only new stars, but planets, which now have all these heavy elements like iron and carbon and stuff necessary for life. Our rocky planet starts out lifeless, but the stones evolve themselves into human beings eventually, and they are on the way to becoming God. It's just a matter of time. This is Hegel. Stones cry out and raise themselves to mind. Now, on the American side of the Atlantic, here we have Emerson, which was hugely influential in the 19th century in this country. And not just that he said things, but he also articulated an impulse, which Nietzsche defined as the will to power. You know that Nietzsche's word overman comes from Emerson's term, the oversoul, right? Emerson had a huge impact on Nietzsche. Therefore, that spirit, that is a supreme being, does not build up nature around us, but puts it forth through us, as the life of the tree puts forth new branches and leaves to the pores of the old. As a plant upon the earth, so a man rests upon the bosom of God. We're kind of distinguished from the other living beings, right? He is nourished by unfailing fountains and draws at his need inexhaustible power. Who can set bounds to the possibility of man? Once inhale the upper air, being admitted to behold the absolute natures of justice and truth, we learn that man has access to the entire mind of the Creator. Is it himself, the Creator in the finite? So again, this vision that we are destined to become divinity of some kind. Now, a lot of as you go into this literature available on the web, including literature by the well-known Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom, you'll see quotations from Nietzsche. Okay, and it's this quotation which you often see. It says Nietzsche in Zarathustra, "I teach you the overman. Man is something that must be overcome. What have you done to overcome it? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. What is the ape to man? A laughing stock or a painful embarrassment. And man shall be just that for the overman, a laughing stock or a painful embarrassment." And here Zarathustra says, "Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. What can be loved in man is he is an overture and a going under." This is the post-human. the overture to the post-human. Not just a transhuman, not just the enhanced human, but what lies beyond our species altogether, except that we would be the distant ancestors. Now, a couple of contemporary quotes to bring it right up to the present moment. Now, here's a quote from the Denver Post. I couldn't believe this when I read this. Denver Post is such a terrible paper, I couldn't believe it. We even stopped taking it, now get the Boulder Daily Camera, which is, I won't even go into it. It's a little better. Denver Post, June 6, 2007. Scientists have succeeded in reprogramming ordinary cells from the tips of mouse tails and rewinding their developmental clocks so that they are virtually indistinguishable from embryonic stem cells, according to studies released Wednesday. Now, you know, this is completely mind-blowing. All right. I mean, first of all, it's probably Nobel Prize kind of achievement. Who would have thought, right? Now, says Dr. Robert Lanza, an embryonic stem cell researcher at Advanced Cell Technology Incorporated in Worcester, Mass., who is not involved in the research. Here's what he says. This is truly the Holy Grail. To be able to take a few cells from a patient, say a cheek swab or some skin cells, and turn them into stem cells in the laboratory. It would be like turning lead into gold. This is alchemy, basically. The alchemical tradition in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, you know, helped spawn what we call modern chemistry and modern science. And what they wanted to do was to transform the elements into some other kind of elements. Now, they had no molecular grasp of atomic understanding, but now we do. And the suggestion here is now, with the technical capacities are available to us, we will be able to turn lead into gold, literally, just a matter of time. And if you got enough motivation. But why turn lead into gold? You'll be able to make gold from scratch. So the prediction is this. In 20 years, you will at home have a large microwave-sized thing, and whatever you want, you just program it in, and it will make it on the spot there, and your credit card will be charged for it. You won't have to go to the store, including the latest designer clothes and everything. So shopping will become really unbelievable. Now, the final quote from Richard Seed, who's a well-known scientist. This is on the radio, Noble quotes, David Noble quotes. God intended for man to become one with God. Here I go back to the quote by Kurzweil. This is the ultimate destiny. See, it's the universe, basically. We are going to become one with God. We are going to have almost as much knowledge and as much power as God. This is a well-known scientist. Now, what are we to make of these passages, which I could have extended, thousandfold, and are central to Western history? These are central teachings. They start out somewhat more modestly, although not completely modestly with St. Paul. I mean, the idea that we are sons and daughters, as we say today, sons and daughters of God, what does this mean? I mean, what is it? Well, the meaning is that we are capable of becoming godlike. If we're the sons and daughters of God, that means we can grow up to become God. And that divinity was not restricted to Jesus Christ, or to Buddha, or to Krishna. These are avatars who are manifesting what's possible, and that we are to honor or worship these people only as signposts of what's possible for us, and not to forget that they were just the first. Now, once we achieve a certain level of technical capacity and institutional setup necessary to sustain and develop it, as we are now, then can we take the next step? And what would the next step? Really beyond Jesus and Buddha. What would that be like? Well, this is the singularity. What would it be like? Now, so what are the, I'm just going to conclude for just a few moments of remarks. I mean, what are we to make of this? I am very disturbed by this. I'm exhilarated by this, but I'm disturbed by it because it's just the implications of it are both fantastic and dreadful. And it may be, you see, that we are at the end game of our species. Now, here's what some people say who are deeply involved in this movement. We are trashing this planet, and we are now in a race to develop intelligence that can survive the ecological collapse of the planet. And this is, because this is the ultimate goal of the universe, this will happen. we will find a way to download ourselves into some kind of silicon-based life. This will leave the planet, and whatever happens to this planet and its organisms, well, let's hope these beings have some concern about us. But that's part of the issue for these people. In other words, the people who are driving this, even if they're not fully conscious of this, one could argue that an Hegelian or Marxist would say, look, behind the back of the historical agents who think they're working to get the Nobel Prize or to get a promotion or to make some contribution in this area or that, is this impulse of spirit to become fully self-conscious and everywhere. And that so we're not actually doing things for ourselves, but we're in the service of something that we're not yet aware of. This would be the singularity, and that is the liftoff point for consciousness to spread throughout the universe. Now, it's really important to consider the following. It's very possible that this is the only planet in the entire known universe that has life on it. And the odds against there being self-conscious life in addition are, we're talking about the figures that the statisticians toss around, stuff like 10 to the 300 power, like odds 10 to the 300 to 1 against life ever arising by chance. Now this is far more than any of the amount of stars in the universe. It's just so far off. So it's entirely possible that this is it. Even though there are hundreds of billions of galaxies and hundreds of billions of stars, the number of incredible coincidences that had to happen, this could be it. And this is another reason why some of the people involved in this have this impetus. I mean, if we at our, if we in our contemporary practices end up undermining the ecological conditions necessary for life, then this whole event is in trouble, especially conscious life. And so let's see how this is going to play out in the next 30 years. I hope to be around to test Kurzweil's proposition about the human brain's capacity computer in about 2020. I'll definitely want to get one. The main problem, they say, with all this is software. They don't know how anyone could program software for this kind of speed. But that's when the computers take over. Okay, so I'm just going to stop and say thank you for your attention. Are you ready for that? Maria.
Okay, so there's so many good, cool ideas in, say points 3 through 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so I bet that lots of people want to ask about them. But before we do, I want to go back to number 2. Well, even 1 and 2. So, like you were talking about the Genome Project and how it took 13 years, even though it was supposed to take much longer. Well, so I guess I'm wondering, what is the it that you're referring to exactly? Like, my understanding of contemporary AI is, it's struggling with things like getting machines to be autodidactic, getting them to be to deal with recursive logic.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and a lot of the challenge is software. In other words, they're getting the computer speeds up, processing power is getting there, but how to design what it took billions of years to design in our brains. You see, this is a big problem. Now, he exhibits a lot of confidence. A lot of people say hubris. Kurzweil and others, they don't seem to think that this is a problem. Let me give an example of this. This guy, has anyone heard of this guy, Nick Bostrom? B-O-S-T-R-O-M. Look him up. He's at Oxford. He's got a whole center over there doing this stuff. Now, he wrote a really good article I read not too long ago. He says, look, there's a 20% chance that we are computer simulation. In other words, that these civilizations, would only have to be a few thousand years older, he says. They've now got to the point where they're talking about not Sim City, we're talking about universe, Sim universe, with conscious beings in it. So that our consciousness, your consciousness, is simulated. Now there's an experience going on, but it's not ultimately yours. Okay, it's these people are, and they use some of their computer power to do this. Now, Bostrom gives how much computing capacity you need for this and blah blah blah. He says there's 1 in 5 chance that's already happened. Right now, I don't know what to make of this. In fact, two competencies. One is, for example, the Human Genome Project. Well, now we have the human genome, shouldn't we just be able to do anything we want? No, it turns out it's all much more complicated than that. The whole protein coding and production process seems to be specifically different in each organism almost. I mean, everybody's got little bits of different stuff, and so that to intervene, you have to then do the work specifically necessary to work on you or me. And this is much different than just, getting a program that's going to cookie cut, godlike avatars one after the next. It's not going to be like that. It's much more difficult. But that doesn't mean, so what? I mean, that doesn't mean, that's just a temporary stumbling block. Presumably that'll happen. But in another instance, the man from whom Kurzweil drew much of his information for this first part of his book, discussion of these curves headed straight up, and this type of exponential growth in terms of research capacity, he posted an essay online, okay, which I read, saying, "Now wait a minute, he's got this wrong, and he's blah blah blah." So he's calling into question the whole thing, okay. And since he's the guy who developed the original findings that Kurzweil builds on, then it does give you a certain pause. So there's a certain kind of a breathless, over-optimistic quality to this text. Nevertheless, because it comes from someone of this quality of mind who has such an incredible track record of accomplishment, you gotta give him a hearing. You can't just dismiss him.
But I guess, are his claims out of step with the actual, curve of progress in artificial intelligence?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? The issue is when will this start turning into an S curve, and his exponential growth will taper off, and it only goes through. Like, I talked to a guy getting his PhD in computer science from UC Berkeley a couple of weeks ago. He was in town. His wife teaches in the English department here. And I said, okay, he's finishing his dissertation. So I put this out to him. I said, what is this going to happen? He said, I'm really skeptical about that. We're already starting to reach the upper limits. You see, you reach certain quantum limits in terms of computing capacity. And there's also the problem of heat buildup in the processing, So you're going to have to find ways around that. Now, Kurzweil mentions ways around this in the book. In other words, he says, look, it's just these are technical matters. They'll be figured out. I mean, who knows when it'll stop. But this is really important. If the curve starts here instead of here, then you won't get up to the point where you have this super capacity. So I believe you were next, and then this gentleman here.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the theory movement, as we become gods and things, and I truly find it exhilarating myself. But what's kind of disconcerting, and what I have to wonder though, is if we keep on talking about we become gods, when actually it seems like we disintegrate the eyes as we move towards that point, and then it becomes the question of, does it become something that's really conscious? Because if you're conscious of everything, is it really the same thing as blind consciousness that's not really conscious at all? And then I have to wonder then what would be the next step? Could it be a cyclical thing that could actually in turn explain the origins of everything?
Well, but this is, who knows? And this is part of the singularity idea, that once you reach that point, we don't know. And there's no way we could know from the vantage point from which we're currently operating, because even if they told us, we wouldn't get it, because we're not intelligent enough to get it. So I don't know what to think about it. In many religious traditions, certainly in monotheism, God in some ways posited as incredibly simple. The complexity is inimicable in a way to divine nature, which is why the Jews and the Muslims resist Trinitarian doctrines. The idea that God has three persons. Wait a minute, that's not monotheism. You see, so there's just a simplicity now, and then you have in all the mystical traditions of monotheism, you have this idea. Well, why then do we have creation? Hegel talks about this. Well, in a way, it's because God is alone, okay, and completely self-absorbed. And one way of manifesting yourself would be in the form of creation and then watching it unfold. Now, in the Hindu tradition, you have this tradition of the concept of lila, or play. And then in the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, they don't have this little restricted cosmos that they started out with in 2,000 years ago. They're always into millions and billions of planets and galaxies. I mean, they're always that believe that the universe is much vaster than our whole solar system. So their idea is, look, when God exhales, this is the production of a universe. And then God waits to see where he or she or it is going to show up. And this will be Hegel. You see, at a certain point, the rocks become alive, and then they become conscious, then they become self-conscious, and then they say, hey, gee, what's God all about? And then we're getting near to divinity remembering who it is, and then divinity inhales, and the whole thing goes away, and then exhales again, and just sees as a sport to see where it will show up this time in the development of any individual universe. So, I mean, you're asking a huge question, but I don't have an answer to them. But the issue of simplicity, I think, is really important. And it's not clear what kind of subjectivity would lie beyond this. A lot of people are afraid, you know, that, what is that? Is it the Star Trek series that has the boar in it? Remember that had that really cute gal as a form of boar, remember? What's her name? 709, yeah, but whatever. But anyway, and so for us, you see, this is, I like that stuff. I love science fiction. But the idea of becoming a part of the board, you see, is to the subjectivity of the main characters in that series, fearful, absorbed, you see. But yet her testimony about it, when she talks about it, was there's a lot going for it. She appreciates being an individual subject again, but she's not totally down on the alternative. Now, this is one of the things that Haraway, as well as Catherine Hales, she wrote this book a few years ago, How We Became Posthuman. Right, so we're already there, right? But they say, look, part of our anxiety about this, about becoming posthuman, is that we have this liberal bourgeois subjectivity which emphasizes our separate autonomous nature. And the idea that that consciousness could be distributed, and that we would participate in a way that's communally distributed, not only with regard to other humans, but other life forms and other beings and computers and stuff, this is deeply threatening to us. But for those who end up there, they would look back and say, look what a poverty-stricken life those people have. Stuck with their little self-enclosed, inside their skin bag cells full of fear and uncertainty, and gee, what a pathetic life. You know, we can see why they might have identified with it, because it's all they knew. But now we know better. So, you know. Yes, and then David, and then yes.
Well, on the one hand, I'm really struck by a certain, just broadly, history of, or philosophy of science elegance and history of science elegance of this, where so many of the tremendous advancements in the scientific revolution in the 1600s were in the rejection of a teleological worldview and the adoption of a mechanical worldview. And even Darwin, in some sense, a child of Hegel.
Right.
And much of the 20th century evolutionary biologists, Stephen Jay Gould and others, are trying to take the telos out of Darwin. And this is bringing it back in a really big way. But I'm also wondering, in terms of number two and singularity and what happened, that whether there might be a kind of a category mistake here, which is that sheer computing capacity is different from consciousness and self-awareness. And that Hegel's dialectic of consciousness, phenomenology of spirit, is really the dialectic of self-awareness. And that, I mean, I think in some sense a real category mistake, with the exception that Hegel himself was saying rocks contain spirit. So it happened once. So who's to say that as we plant a rock in essentially making a robot, that is certainly not self-aware, that its computing capacity gets to a certain point where it crosses that gulf in the category mistake to self-awareness. But knowing nothing about artificial intelligence and where we are in the whole discussion of that, is there still debate about this separation between the cognitive, computing capacity and self-awareness?
Well, first of all, I would say that he spent a lot of time in his book on that question. And he's a very sophisticated discussion of the nature of consciousness in general, because he likes it. He likes consciousness. He's not an eliminative materialist like somebody like Dennett or Churchman. I mean, this guy believes in consciousness. He likes it, and he says computers can become conscious. Now, even the Dalai Lama said that about 15 years ago. He's been holding a series for many years of talks with contemporary scientists and neuroscientists. But he said, look, if silicon can, if they can get it to that point, I'm okay with that being conscious. It doesn't have to be carbon-based. But of course, we don't know this. And there are people like Bob Hanna up at my CU Boulder, as well as Haraway and certainly Catherine Hales would say, look, no, consciousness is essentially embodied. And what's missing in this contemporary discourse, especially AI discourse, is not an adequate paying of attention to embodiment. Because every cell in the body is conscious. It's not just your brain. Okay, let me give you an example of this. Have you ever heard these stories about what happens to people who get heart transplants? Their personality changes in many cases to reflect the nature of the person who gave them the heart. Now, used in classical times, the center of consciousness was regarded as the heart, not the brain. So the heart is not a neutral organ, nor any cells neutral. They're themselves imbued with a primitive form of consciousness, however you want to talk about that, and the whole thing goes up to make up a human being. So the brain in the vat idea, you see, and the computer in the vat, can this work? And robots, you see, can they develop the sensory capacity at this molecular level necessary to integrate the brain power they have with the sensing power that's necessary? That seems to me to be a huge issue. Another issue which I haven't even brought up is that if you think about the focus is so typically on moving from human levels of intelligence to way above it. What about moral development, aesthetic development, spiritual development, all the other kinds of modes of intelligence and awareness that go to make up a human being? Where are these? I mean, Kurzweil's aware of the dangers, but he doesn't talk. Now, are we going to be able to keep pace? Are we going to build in these moral development capacity into these beings? Or, in fact, there's serious conversation among people who work in this area about making these beings human-friendly, right? It's like, have you seen the film I, Robot? Okay, from the what was his name who wrote it? Asimov, right? The 3 laws, you're not supposed to hurt humans, et cetera, and so should we not be talking about that? I mean, shouldn't that be part of the equation, and we're messing around with this stuff? I don't know, but I know that this is what I've concluded. These things are very close. I mean, there are technical problems, but look at all the technical problems we've overcome. And if we overcome these technical problems in the ways anticipated, we may end up with these hyper-conscious beings who really aren't human and who don't really have any interest in us any more than we do in worms. This is what I am reminded of in trying to find a quote from Luther. But Luther's discourse about the relation of humans to God was that humans are basically like worms. And that's a discourse you see in this posthumanism discourse. We will be like worms compared to what's to come. Yeah.
First a comment and then a question. It's interesting, some of the avatars you mentioned, the early avatars, were somewhat anti-materialistic and suspicious of the road you take when you go down the technological path, and that it actually leads away from what would be the line. The lineup is very ambiguous about what that means. But I guess my question is, it seems like, I mean, from my own view of intelligence, which is hopefully evolving, is that objectives or purposes are not extrinsic to intelligence, but they are integral to intelligence. And so the way the story seems to spin out from these, these booster techno folks who talk about processing power and software and getting those both as accelerated and as super excellent as they can be, and then we'll put them to work. But it seems to me that intelligence is really a threefold. It's really a three-way relation between whatever processing power, software, and objectives. And so the idea is that seems to be that. So I guess the really simple question is, what's their notion of intelligence, and does it make purpose and objectives extrinsic to intelligence?
Well, if you,
because that would put values back in with science and technology.
If we allow people whom we unkindly describe as computer geeks to define intelligence and its purpose, then we are probably in deep trouble. Okay, which is why everyone needs to become involved and get that there's something happening here. We don't know what it is, to quote an old line from an old Dylan song. And we need to become engaged with this. And that's an excellent example. Now, Kurzweil's a very accomplished man. He's not an ordinary geek, although here's a guy who takes 256 supplements a day. He's my age and he has the body of a 4-year-old, according to his doctor.
Did you say 4-year-old or 40-year-old?
40.
Oh, okay.
I'll go 40 is fine with me. So he's really into life extension. All right. So part of the goal is immortality, which who knows, maybe very long lifespan is possible. But he's very much into the idea that, look, these beings, if it turns out right, will be capable of sublime aesthetic experience, incredible, artistic feats, athletic. In other words, everything we could possibly imagine as human beings, they will be able to do, and they'll be setting up capacities and possibilities that we can't imagine. That, in other words, will do all this fantastic stuff we could imagine as humans, but then these beings will discover possibilities for exploration and expression of their capacities, which we don't know about. Now, I don't know. That's what his promise is.
Yeah, but my objection is that intelligence is a 3-legged stool, and they're building these things without a third leg, so they can't get to where they're going.
How about this? How about if they, instead of doing singular serial processing, right, you build computers that have increasing numbers of parallel processors, right, like a la Dennett or somebody, where you have, Churchland talks about, well, it's not just him, but the neurologists talk about the fact that we have hundreds of thousands of parallel processes going on at the same time, which then makes the processes also aware of the other processes, which would make, at least if any entity becomes that aware of what else it's doing, aware of its wanting to, and injecting value, right? Wanting to continue to be, among other things, right? Because of it's aware that it is, and that's not going to stop. If it's got tasks to do from the outside, takes over those tasks, then what's it going to do? What do I need to do to get here? What do I need to do that? What do I need to do to be able to keep doing in order to, and then there does develop a sense of an I emerging from a whole bunch of, not I's, but processes, but awarenesses of the other tasks that are going on. Well, I mean,
there are many discourses, like the ones you're describing, Candace is describing, trying to make sense of the liftoff that would be necessary to get to something like self-consciousness. Does anyone here remember when you became self-conscious? I do. I remember it. I was in the 7th grade. I was walking down the hallway after school, okay? And all of a sudden, I had this profound realization that I was me. And that I had a life that I had to live. That I was going to have to make something up, about what I was going to be. And that I was responsible for me. That it was a very, I don't know, I have chills when I think about it. It was terrifying, and it was tremendously liberating. But it was like the initiation into this next phase. Now, what had to be going on, you see, in this deep parallel processing, with all this recursiveness that had happened? Because before that, I was kind of like a zombie. Okay, now I was conscious, but I had no independent self. Right, I was somebody who would play ball with the other guys, and I was able to do things, but I had this next level hadn't kicked in, and when that kicked in, it changed everything. Then I got real conscious of being sinful. That was the first step. I won't go into it. I was raised Catholic. I'm still working it out. But now, will these beings be capable of sin? You see, will these beings be capable of recognizing moral shortcomings? And what about limits? You see, where do we get our sense of limits and what we're permitted to do? If in fact there's no God and there are no essences of things and everything's temporary, like our species can't be immortal presumably because we're organic, okay? Well, then is everything permitted? Why can't we just redesign ourselves? Who's going to stand in the way? You're going to have people going into desert islands with all the equipment, with no government funding, and they're going to do stuff that that is just gonna be unbelievable, okay? So now, but that, so it's really pushing us up against the question of the meaning of human life. I mean, is there a meaning to it? Are there limits? Is there some things we shouldn't be transgressing? Or is it all just open to whatever technological capacity we've got? Yeah. Well, let me ask Kim first, and we'll come back to you.
I want to kind of build on David's question actually about sort of purpose-driven intelligence.
Right.
And I'm having a hard time getting my head around the fact that the singularity would be this wild sort of oversoul, right? This wild self becoming in all directions. And what's making me, what I'm thinking about here is Huxley's Brave New World, right? And the Brave New World was this wildly technologically advanced world,
Right.
but it was still purpose-driven, right? And the purpose was stability. And they gave up everything else to maintain this stability, and that's what advanced them. So I'm having a hard time shifting from purpose-driven sort of, you know, we're making this advance and this advance, the software and the hardware and whatnot, to this kind of wildly open self-consciousness, if that makes sense. So I'm having a hard time moving from, you know, as you said, these beings would be capable of these wonderful, sublime aesthetic experiences. Why should we believe that they would? I mean, why would that still be of value, that they would be?
That's what I said, my supposition is they max all that out, but because that's a very limited capacity that we have as humans. But once they get, I mean, for example, what does your cat think about you when you're reading? My cat likes to climb up on top of my book. Okay. Now, the cat doesn't get it. I'm having these fantastic experiences sitting here reading, but the cat thinks he should be petting me or feeding me or something, right? So, so many human capacities are just off the cat's radar. You know, we share some emotional world space with them. We share a spatio-temporal world space. We share, you know, a lot of mammalian stuff. But they have a lot of stuff that's totally. Now, is it? So Kurzweil is asking the following question: can you get the possibility of beings with purposes and with capacities that are so far beyond anything you can imagine that it's off our charts? That's what he's asking us to do. Now, I don't know that it's possible, but that's part of the science fiction angle of this, you see. And it's something that, if it doesn't inspire both awe and dread in you, then Kurzweil would say you haven't gotten yet what's the possibility here is. You know, it's us being left behind dramatically by the end of the century. And I don't know if it's going to happen. And there's a lot in the way of it. But he's very much, if you read this book, you'll see he's very attuned to all this. He's anticipated a lot of these objections and given a lot of thought to this. And who knows whether 30 years from now we'll look back and say, hey, another crackpot futurist, you know, the whole thing went south, and we're lucky to even be able to feed ourselves at this point, much less be sponsoring post-human intelligence. Yeah.
Related to what David and Kim are getting at here, I think the power between two paradigms. One is a sort of Hobbesian paradigm, the concept of intelligence, and the other would be sort of Platonic Aristotelian. And that, you know, if it's just Hobbes, which is intelligence is understood strictly in terms of computational capacity, the ability to do arithmetic sort of thing. And if that's what building capacity and intelligence is, and, you know, I think then there's no ethical implication in it at all. Then you're just, as Hobbes says, the relentless pursuit of power after power ceasing to unblock death. As Candace is saying, you know, you're reaching out to something to do, but you're just expanding beyond your horizons, because that's what the engine is doing. You're like a virus in some sense,
Right.
but a virus of a computational capacity. But the more Platonic model is that reasoning involves so much more than just computation. It's going to involve a synthesizing of aesthetics with reasoning, with ethics and the like in a good world, which obviously Kurzweil, I think, has brought into whether he's stating it or not, an understanding of a world which is good.
He has a more benign vision of this.
Well, maybe not even benign, I think actually positively good.
Yeah, right.
We are actually going to, as you say, we haven't talked about these other things, because I think he's thinking that as we're increasing those capacities, we are also increasing our ethics and our compassion at the same time.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, are we? I mean, and could it happen? And what would it take to build into these robots, or whatever we can call them, I mean, these post-humans, to build in these capacities. Will they do it on their own? I mean, I don't really know. But the thing, what David brought up, there's a lot of people that say, and by the way, Kim's concerned about change. You know what Marx said it in the 19th century. All that is solid melts into air. That's a condition of capitalism and postmodernity. There's nothing solid left. That's why people try to become fundamentalists. Because they want something solid, but the solidity is slipping away from everything. I mean, the speed of I mean, just let me give you an example. Remember the iPod? Invented, what, 5 years ago? Have you noticed the number of supporting array that's been developed around those? 5 years, just one tiny example. I mean, and technological innovation changes our whole world. What was the world like before automobiles? Before people had a moving bedroom, right? I mean, what was the world like before computers and internet? I remember a time before email. It was wonderful. I had long hours in which I could devote to something without being interrupted. So technological innovation forces changes, cultural, social changes, which are not asked for, but these things are thrown out there, the market goes to work on them, they're made available, and we adapt.
Does it force the changes, or does it force the choice about whether or not to accept the changes?
No, so if you're a business person, do you have to be able to use a computer? Or if you're seriously into business? Yeah. Or a doctor or a teacher? Yeah, you don't have any choice about it. Maybe if you're some 60-year-old like me, you can still hold out, but you know, because I'm going to retire. But if you're a 25-year-old trying to get into the profession, say, no, I don't do email. Well, sorry.
Right. So the economic system which we run
Runs
forces people to choose. But you know, the downshifters in the technology movement would say, let's not make a deterministic claim about technology. Let's make sure we step back and realize that unless something has changed, we have autonomy, and we're either the systems are running us or we're running the systems.
Well, if the electricity went down for 3 months, where would we be? We'd all be dead, basically. So we're seriously dependent on the system. We're not independent of the system. We're already cyborgs in that respect. We're functions of larger complex on which we're totally dependent. Totally dependent. Couldn't even get water. And it wouldn't have pumps to get the water out or clean it. So, you know, so now let me just, one thing you said, David, too. A lot of people say, look, what we've been doing is a big horizontal technological movement. More and more power. Okay, this is Hobbesian, this is Nietzsche, will to power. Ever more greater capacity to control. But that what spiritual development about is vertical development. It has nothing to do with becoming more technological skilled. It has to do with awakening. And such awakening into psychic, subtle, causal, non-dual forms of consciousness are just not totally in a different alignment. They're not related to this. Now, would it be possible, though, at some point, you see, to intervene? So Candace, let's say, for years has been interested in achieving permanent higher states of consciousness. We put her in a little chamber. We direct those electromagnetic impulses, just with precisely those molecules that are necessary for this. And when she comes out 10 minutes later, she is a godlike being full of wisdom and compassion. Walks around like Lord Krishna. Okay, with that type of intervention. Doesn't have to spend 50 years on the meditation cushion, or doesn't have to get beat up by a Zen master or anything. You know, she just gets instant total enlightenment. Is that possible? We shall see. I'd like some of it. If we could get it. So, but maybe we should end to let people here who need to go, but some people will probably trapped. And I'll hang around here for a while and answer any other questions you might have. Thanks so much for
Thank you.
With great power comes great something. I can't remember. Well, I'm going to punch your lights out.
Oh, wait, this responsibility.
Sorry.
It is completely different than it is ethnically speaking, and yet I can easily imagine reading the same books, etc., having the same cultural identity. So the ethnic composition may change, and yet mentality will remain the same.
Okay, but just on a multicultural level then, when you have many cultures running through the society, and in a sense in which one no longer predominates. I mean, of course, you can still say that America is predominantly Protestant or whatever, but there are the Catholic strains, and there are, you know, atheists, and all these strains running throughout our culture. Does that somehow detract from our ability to understand the classic in its universality or its
In the
symbolism?
sense that for the most part, those people who are so committed to those principles are indifferent to reading those classics anyway. Now, ask yourself the following question: whether there is a consistent university curriculum, and there isn't, which is a reflection of what's going on in politics and social life. The best or the worst.
Ask me that again.
Ask yourself whether there is a consistent curriculum. And then you will have the answer to the question, how politicized the universities are. I think university curricula to a large extent mirror the political situation. Now, look, I'm not going to tell you it's better or worse. What I can tell you is that there is something not quite right if students do not have rudimentary knowledge of certain books or historical events. And in this respect, the situation did change for the worse. My other argument would be this. Some of those books that we call great books, they taught a certain intellectual discipline. They were replaced by others, and this discipline apparently was lost. I don't know what's going to happen with Stab reading The Republic, or Rousseau's Social Contract, or Hobbes, and a number of other works. You know, you stop reading literature and poetry, you will lose sensitivity, that's sure. When you stop reading classics of political philosophy, I'm not sure how far you can go without.
Yeah.
And there's no question that Hobbes is a Leviathan, or whether you like it or not. Whether the same goes for Aristotle's Politics, Plato's Republic, Aquinas' Treatise of Natural Law. That this culture will cease to continue as we know it.
This culture is not as monolithic. I know I talked about this before, but the United States is very stratified. And so what you notice in one stratum of the culture, you know, some kids do read all this stuff. I mean, I'm not saying this is good news about the United States, but the United States is very stratified. And there is a subset of students who read this stuff and who do have this kind of an education. It's just not ubiquitous.
But
It's the ruling class universities.
It has
They're
never,
mostly in the ruling class
Yeah,
universities.
but I'm saying that therefore, I mean, therefore to say it's one, one monolithic group, that this is what America does.
but it has
It
never
really doesn't
been,
make
you know,
sense.
I'm not arguing for this kind of unicity of either intellectual life in the state. That has never been the case. The question is whether what you learn from Thomas Aquinas' Treatise on Law is that there are universal legal or judicial principles that are independent of us and that they cannot be violated under any circumstances. And that's a great lesson for the judges and for all those who think of constitutions. Now, what I'm saying is that you can't make a multicultural claim and be consistent if you say all cultures are equal, because you will end up with competing, say, legal claims, one of which will say that we can stone people for stealing a loaf of bread, And I think that's the end of multiculturalism in this sense, that no one who is in his sound mind is ever going to make the claim, you should be stoned to death for stealing a loaf of bread. Stratification, when the stratification proceeds much, much further, and certain cultural claims be made, as they are made now, the whole experiment may end. That the society will not be able to tame itself. We have the system of justice in the US is not neutral, it's European English tradition of common law and Blackstone. That is what was accepted. You reject, you're going to end up in barbarism. Well, you don't want to have a legal system that operates outside the US and Europe. Would you?
I don't understand the question.
Would you like to live in a society in which you would be stoned for stealing bread?
Oh, I didn't think that wasn't the question you asked first.
There are alternative legal systems. I'm saying that if you make a strong multiculturalist claim, you have to
I'm not
commit.
making a multiculturalist claim, I'm making a class stratification claim.
Well, the question is what the influential class is.
Thank you.